and we're going to carry on with our agenda. And before we go there, well, you know, it takes a few moments, of course, with all the measures and everything that's happening. Sitting here and listening to the session, it was just fantastic, this feeling of being able to be at a conference again and to be able to have this conversation, to engage with speakers. This feels absolutely great. As I said, and as you know, this is, of course, a hybrid event, and we are heading towards a fireside chat that illustrates exactly this very format of our chat and our day. This is the second fireside chat, where we have Thierry DEAU, Chief Executive Officer at Meridiam, Chairman at Long-Term Infrastructure Investors Association, and Chairman at Finance for Tomorrow. And also with us already here connected is Ambroise FAYOLLE, Vice President at the European Investment Bank. Monsieur FAYOLLE, can you hear us?
I hear you very well, thank you.
Welcome. This is exactly the first chart of the total hybrid format of this inaugural day. That's how it is. And if you've been working over the past couple of months, I'm sure that all of us have done a lot of meetings and a lot of conferences and a lot of calls this way, this format. We're sort of used to it nowadays, more than we used to be before the unprecedented, of course, COVID-19 pandemic. And with how things changed and how our lives changed, let me just start, and I'm bringing you the microphone right away. That would be... I'm going to bring you the microphone right away. Monsieur FAYOLLE, let me start with you, please, in this case. What are the lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis, specifically when it comes to the green agenda and green ambitions?
Well, I would say the following. I would say the following. Sorry, Thierry, for taking over. Good morning to you. I would say that, of course, there has been emergency needs, and we dealt with that. We have increased significantly our support to SMEs, for example, in the first months of the year, and we continue to do that. But you have to differentiate that from the need for the medium and long term objectives to keep the green as a key objective of the recovery. And for that, we are convinced that the way that has been set in Europe by the European Commission, by the European Investment Bank, is the best way to protect in the long term the investment level and also, of course, the climate objectives that we need. It is also a very good way, and we may come back to that maybe, on preserving competitiveness and jobs, because there is a lot of need in terms of jobs for energy efficiency, for example, because there is a lot of need, for example, in terms of innovation related to competitiveness. And let me just finish by one more point. When we look at the lessons, I mean, the lessons from this crisis, I'm not sure we are able to do that now, but we were able to do something else, which is to learn the lessons from the previous crisis. And what we learned in the previous crisis, the financial crisis, was two things. The first one is we need to act quickly. And the second thing is we need to take great care of investment, because investment is among the first things that you decrease when you are in a crisis. And this is exactly the worst way possible to prepare for the great future.
Thank you so much. Let's pick it up here. Taking great care of investment, of course, when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to sustainable infrastructure, and when it comes to now the circumstances where in the shaping up this post-COVID crisis infrastructure. What's your take on that?
First of all, I think the crisis has sort of reset what we thought about infrastructure sort of back to basis. We always thought of infrastructure as a sustainable class, sustainable investment class, also infrastructure as providing essential services. And the fact that, as all the presenters earlier were mentioning, the asset class has been quite resilient is actually a good sign. But it does mean that looking forward, we have to keep those principles together. So it's about essential services. It's when we talk about essential services, that does mean that we need to take a long-term view of the economic viability beyond the financial, but just the economic viability of infrastructure. Because if you eventually a government looking at it from the long-term perspective, this could only be a blip in a way. So investment is necessary. But even as a financial investor, if you look at it from a 50-year perspective, it's also just a blip, even if you have airport in your portfolio. So it's important to go back to basics. And what that means as well is that we do need to focus on the consequences of essentiality, which is the sustainable goals that we're trying to achieve, and including, I mean, the green agenda is only one part of those sustainable goals. Economic development is another part of the sustainable goals. Transitioning certain economies from underdeveloped to developed is also part of the sustainable goals. So we have to take care more of the stakeholders that are around the world and around those projects that we invest in to make sure that this comes back to the center of the equation of investing in infrastructure.
Monsieur Fayolle, how does it work and how do we proceed with this in regards with the EU Green Agenda and the reinforced goals of the European Union? We've heard some new announcements, of course, a couple of weeks ago in the State of the Union on the bigger EU ambitions, even bigger now.
Well, I mean, we work completely aligned with the European Commission, and we very much welcome what the President of the European Commission has announced in her State of the Union address, which is indeed increasing the level of ambition by asking for emission reduction of by 2030 of 55%. I mean, as you may know, EIB has taken a number of important decisions end of last year. And let me just quote the three big decisions that have been taken. The first one is on energy projects. We have decided that we would not finance anymore unabated fossil fuel projects. The second one is a quantitative objective, which is by 2025, we have decided to increase the level of climate and environment projects that we finance from 25% currently to 50%. I mean, we are doing around 60 to 70 billion euros projects every year. So when you consider that, basically it is 15 to 20 billion euros now. It will be 30 by 2025, and 2025 is tomorrow. So we will need to increase significantly the level of projects that we finance and that have a clear climate component. And the last decision that we have taken is that by the end of this year, our ambition is to be 100% Paris aligned. And the reason for that commitment is that, I mean, we will continue to do projects that are not green. And actually, the objective is after 2025 to do half of our activity that will not be considered as climate projects. But if what you do with your right hand, you do exactly the contrary with your left hand, it makes zero sense. So we need to have all our activity that follows the principles of Paris. And in particular, that means that we will apply the principle that is in the EU taxonomy, that is the do not significant harm. So we are not going to do projects if they do significant harm to the environment, but we will continue to do projects that are not completely climate. And let me finish by saying that I agree actually with Thierry. I agree also with those in the previous panel, Séverin and others, who said this is a huge opportunity. I mean, we know that, for example, in energy efficiency, there is a lot to do in Europe, a lot. We know that that this is going to be creating a lot of jobs that actually are local jobs. We know that there is a lot to do in innovation because we don't know all the innovation that will be needed to come to climate neutrality in 2050. And we know that we need to do that in a sustainable way. And we need to do that also and for us at the European Bank in Luxembourg, it is very important. We need to do that in a just transition way. so that all Europeans can consider this objective as a key one for themselves.
Thank you. With the reinforced green agenda, what we heard from Monsieur Fayolle and the EU efforts, and of course the new goals announced when it comes to going towards 2030, not even 2050, we see this push, that we see the reinforced goals and efforts, but we also see that we are living through the unprecedented COVID-19 economic crisis. How is that impacting way on that, from your perspective?
I mean, I do think it's an opportunity. I mean, the crisis, as I said, has reset quite a number of things, so we have to focus on the important things. and investing even more in this sector is what can help really solve this crisis or actually limit the impact, the tremendous impact that the economic crisis following the COVID crisis will have. And really, it's an opportunity to reset things in a way where you can involve people a bit more in the consequences of these investments and making investment with a different lens. And I think the EU Green Deal is a great opportunity for that if we broaden it to the other goals, because I don't think we should forget the economic goals and the social goals. And as Ambroise was saying, it's all about a just transition to a different world. One thing I would mention.
But let me just stop you here, and I'm going to totally play the devil's advocate here.
That's
but
fine.
some might say that, you know what, actually, of course, the whole idea, the transition idea, the green agenda is, of course, so important. But some might say that now the circumstances are so complicated for the others, so they might prefer to focus, maybe to postpone that one a little bit, saying, hey, first of all, I had to focus on the recovery after the COVID-19 crisis and cope up with the current and urgent situations and problems before going into climate agenda and green agenda.
I think two answers to that. First of all, there was already an immediate response, and I think, I mean, sitting at the investment committee of the European Fund for Strategic Investment, seeing what EIB has done, seeing what all government in Europe have been able to put together to be able to react, because the 700 billion plan comes after many immediate actions from those governments in terms of supporting their economies, SMEs, and other companies. So the second answer is if you surely postpone the transition to a greener economy, you basically securing double sudden death. Because at the end of the day, making investment today that are not sustainable will not be productive over the long term. So if you actually thinking that going back to developing coal projects would be a solution to the economic crisis in Poland, for example, I think that's a major mistake. But what I wanted to say about the EU plan is my concern, because I'm quite positive about it, is a bit one that I share with Patrick Pouyanné. The EU taxonomy at the moment tends to exclude things, and I'm mostly worried about some of the countries in Europe that are really in need, and I was thinking in Poland, for example, coming out of coal is a complicated process, and if you could no longer invest in gas or nuclear, what else can you do? But also thinking about the emerging economies. I mean, many of those will need to transition from heavy fuel in their production to gas to other things, and we do forget that actually the best transition country in Europe has been the UK, because they got out of coal through gas and nuclear, and now in 10 years they'll probably be a good, they're no longer in the EU unfortunately, but their policies were sort of steady, very focused, and they used all the tools to decrease their emission by doing so.
And of course, there is the newly initiated Just Transition Fund, and this initiative by the European Union, exactly for the cases for some countries, as you just mentioned. Monsieur Fayolle, let me ask you, what about the recovery plans in Europe, and how the recovery plans consider the SDG priorities?
Well, I mean, this is one of the big elements of the recovery. I mean, look at the way the French government has made its recovery plan. I mean, you can find green everywhere, and of course the European Union, EIB, the Commission will support as much as they can this sustainability, environmental, climate action component of that. And I think this is important. I also think this is going to be also important because investors are moving in this direction. You see that when you discuss with companies, and that's an obvious development that actually is going to accelerate, I think, the transition. But I completely share what Thierry said. If we want to be successful, we need to be successful everywhere in Europe. And if we want to be successful everywhere in Europe, you need to strengthen significantly your action in those geographies that have more to do to reach the targets. And when you discuss with these geographies, I mean, with the responsible people in this part of Europe, especially, for example, in eastern part of Europe, you see people that are extremely interested to develop also projects that are sustainable, because I mean, they know as well that things need to change if you want to reach not only climate neutrality, but something that is sustainable for the development of their country.
Of course, as the speaker said at the previous session, when it comes to infrastructure and developing and investing in infrastructure, it has a lot to do about just a way of life and improving, in general speaking, the way of life. How these priorities and the criteria, when it comes to SDG priorities particularly, how are they taken into account when it comes to investments, and how should they be?
I think a lot of us in the industry have been working on measuring impact and really clarifying criteria. And I think that's very important, because you can make all the declaration about becoming net zero, but you also have to put together indicators and KPIs that allow you to show that you're getting there. So that's a very important piece. To give you an example of the Long-Term Infrastructure Investor Association, we've been since inception working on a handbook with KPIs and with methodology for the investors that are members and others. And this has been revisited actually this year and reissued, including of the SDG side of the ESG. So we're upgrading tools for investors to actually be able to measure this. As Meridiam ourselves, we've put a target in emerging markets to be net zero, and we are actually already net zero in our investment in emerging markets. And in Europe, we're trying to be Paris aligned. We're not far away, but we're getting there. But this takes a constant effort of measuring and having action plan to actually improve your investment and your portfolio. Not everything is set when you make your initial investment. You can actually, through real management and through real engagement with the companies you invest in and the projects, improve your carbon footprint. You can actually do quite a lot throughout the life of investment. That does mean that you take a long-term view for that investment, because you can't do that in 2-3 years, but you can do it in 10-15 years.
And that was another question that I wanted to ask you straight away on the very important, of course, issue when it comes to the feeling of certainty and stability. Because now, of course, when you try to move forward with the green agenda, with the SDG priorities, investment, at the same time, we're living through very disruptive and uncertain times in that regard. What's your take on that?
I mean, that does help reducing volatility. When you actually integrate your impact, whether it's carbon, whether it's climate, whether it's social, into the way that you make investment. I mean, if I take the example of carbon, at the end of the day, even if there is a transition, those investments will become stranded assets because nobody will be able to buy them, either because the regulator would have put a huge capital charge on the fact that you're emitting, or that public policies will nearly prevent you from doing it. And it's not now, and it's not an idea to have it now, but in 10, 15, 20 years. And so therefore, engaging and measuring and sort of anticipating this sort of long-term trend and making sure you align with the Paris alignment actually is safeguarding your asset for the long term.
Monsieur Fayolle, what's your take on that?
Can I just
Yes, please.
add one more? I think what Thierry just said is fundamental. I mean, we need to anticipate as much as we can, and it's not only because of climate. This is in itself a key objective, but it's also in terms of investment, of funding policy. It is also a smart move.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both speakers, Monsieur DEAU, Monsieur Fayolle. Thank you so much for this chat. Great having you with us here through the video call.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, and thank you very much for this chat.